Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 34 of Future Strong. I am your host, Lindsay Pollock. I'm the author of 4 career and workplace advice books and a brand ambassador for Capfinity. And as you can see, we are Nikki-less today. Poor Nikki Garcia. We spoke together at the fabulous NALP National Association of Law Placement Conference in New Orleans, and Nikki got stuck in Charlotte, North Carolina for 24 hours and is now on a plane back to the UK. So Nikki, we miss you. We hope that you have safe travels. Her number one strength on the Capfinity Strength Profile is adventure. So she is definitely having an adventure in the skies, but we miss Nikki, and I will be speaking today solo. The good news is I have one of my favorite people in our business and in the world, and someone I've known for a long time. So we're going to have a lot to talk about. I am so pleased to welcome Dan Black of EY to the conversation. Dan, for those who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. And hi, Lindsay, and hi, everyone. It is so great to be here with you and all of you. I am Dan Black. I am coming to you live just north of New York City today in Westchester County. So I've been based in New York my whole life, and I am the talent attraction and acquisition leader globally for EY, Ernst & Young. I've been doing that job for a number of years. Actually, I've been at EY for about 28 years. So right out of school, actually I started in preschool, so hence the youthful looks, etc. I've been active certainly with Lindsay and with other organizations like NACE. I know been around the world, quite frankly, and quite honestly, with campus recruiting. Now I handle executive recruiting and lateral recruiting as well. But campus recruiting was where I got my start in talent.
Thanks, Dan. And everyone, we want to welcome all of you watching from around the world. So many of our good friends are here. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you are watching from. And please share your questions and comments for Dan. Because I don't have Nikki, I'm going to rely on all of you to help me with moderating and asking questions for Dan. And while we do this, I wanted to, Dan, actually start with what you mentioned, having been at EY for 28 years. You know, we talk a lot about the changes in the workplace, and probably I think one of the biggest from, maybe our parents' generation to now is it's very rare to work even in the same industry, let alone the same company for decades. And I don't know if you're gunning for that gold watch at retirement, but that's kind of the stereotype. Can you talk a little bit about not just your decision to stay at one company, but also what it's like to have that kind of longevity? I don't think we have a lot of people who do that anymore. So I'd really love to hear kind of the ups and downs and the changes you've seen and kind of what you've gotten from that experience.
Absolutely. And let me just start by saying it was never my intention to be at one place for a long, long time. I was one of these adventurous college students that thought, oh, I'm going to have, 17 different careers. I'm going to travel the world, see lots of different things. And so it really was, again, similar to what I'm seeing a lot of students today. My thought and my hope was going into just have a lot of different experiences and have a wide variety of experiences throughout the course of my career. There are multiple ways to go about that, right? You can do that through multiple companies, multiple locations, or in my case, and what's been the case, is having multiple careers within the same at the same employer. And that really, I have to say, and look, I'm a big fan of EY. Of course, I've been here for a long time. It's one of the things when people ask me, what's kept you around so long? What about that longevity? Is that every several years, at the very minimum, there is an active, deliberate discussion that I have with my boss, my peers, my mentors around, okay, now what? Now what's next? It's almost as soon as you get something under your belt and you're feeling good and comfortable in that role, it's kind of like, okay, it's time to push on to something new. Now that something new could be a larger remit. So in my case, maybe it was overseeing recruitment in the US and then North America and now global. Or it could be something completely different, as was the case when I went from being an audit professional, client serving professional, into talent. But at the end of the day, it's that deliberate career discussion that is happening on a much more regular basis. That's what keeps me here. Because I will tell you right now, Lindsay, I have no interest in doing quote unquote the same thing over and over. But there is something that I will say that I talk about this with students all the time, being able to have the variety that you want. The variety of experience, of background, of exposure, of interaction with different types of people. being able to do that while still being within what I'll call, a construct, a culture that feels very comfortable and supportive, and not comfortable in the bad way, comfortable in the good way. So I've been able to stay with an organization that is committed to things that are very, very near and dear to my heart. So things like diversity and inclusion, things like, the environment, things like, being successful at work and at home, bringing your full self to work, being in that environment, but still getting the exposure to the variety of, work experiences. That's really kismet, and that's what's kept me around for so long. One last thing I'll say is, throughout that time, it isn't just like, oh, well, hey, if you're doing well, we'll just move you, quote unquote, up to the next level. There's some semblance of that if you've been in a place for a while, but it is also, how do we retool and give you the additional skills to help you have a wider array of choices at your organization? And I have to say, I've been put into, I went through a leadership program at Harvard through the firm. I got my master's at Fordham through the firm. These are all things where EY has said, hey, you know what, you're pretty good, but you could be better. And here are some things that we think will open more, opportunities for you at the firm. And that's one thing that has really been I think a big advantage is, hey, we're going to continue to build your skill set, as opposed to what I see a lot of people when they move from employer to employer. They're going from one place to another place to, in essence, do something very similar to what they've been doing. That's why you're getting hired, right? For your experience, doing something similar, but just in another location. You're not necessarily, and not in all cases, but not necessarily stretching the gray matter as much as something like what I've experienced, which is, let's throw you into something completely different, give you the skills that you need, and see how it goes.
There's so much that I love that I think is a lesson for individuals in their own career paths at every stage, but also for organizations. We're in this great resignation, great reshuffle, whatever you want to call it. I think what people miss, and my latest book is called Recalculating, and I ended up writing an entire chapter about recalculating within your own company, because I think people think, I want something different, so I'm going to leave. And there's so many opportunities within an organization to retrain, as you talked about, to grow, to develop, to move around. You don't necessarily have to leave, particularly in a huge company. And I was talking to one employer, and they said they get so irritated because they do exit interviews when people are quitting. And they say, well, why are you leaving? They say, oh, well, I had this different opportunity elsewhere. And the HR person says, but you could have done that here. And they say, well, nobody told me that. I didn't know that. So I think it's equally important for the individual to look for those opportunities and raise your hand to say you want them, as it is for the company to make sure that people know. And while we're talking, the comments are roaring in. So I do want to welcome some people here before we go too far, and then I'll ask you to weigh in. We have also a lot of past guests on Future Strong with us today, quite the all-star audience. We've got Corey Twitty, our friend from Netflix. Corey watching from San Jose, welcome. We've got Allison Barrett from Bath in the UK, our friend Maria Stein from Michigan State University, Professor Ho Law, welcome. Dave Ong is making us jealous by watching from Tampa, Florida. Hello to Dave. And Hermelinda Davis from Michigan, who says, Dan, I agree with the variety and value alignment to keep interested. Growth and learning are so important. So thank you to everybody on that. And here's our friend Manny. You name-checked Harvard, so Manny has joined us.
There you go.
Dan, any final thoughts on some of those comments?
Yeah, I do want to touch on one thing, because we have that very same thing. Let's address the elephant in the room, particularly as many of you I know are joining from college career centers or people that advise college students. Organizations and employers in general have not been great about really advocating and helping employees move from one place to another. There's not a lot of organizations that are well known for that. And so in many cases, it's like kind of an age-old story among large employers and people, not just in my industry, but in others, that say, oh yeah, if you raise your hand for something that's outside of your current remit, you're going to be on some list somewhere, or you may have a very possessive manager that says, I can't afford to lose you. I want to keep you with me. And so while part of it is, hey, I wasn't aware of something that else was out there, you also have to create that environment where it's okay to raise your hand, where it's okay to look at other things within an organization. And while some of that, I've been in these discussions for a long time with EY, some of that is the mechanics of, how do we post jobs, or more importantly, how do we find the skills among our existing employees to help, to find other opportunities for them. Part of it is changing the hearts and minds of people in the organization, that if you really love the person that's working for you or on your team, the best thing you can do for them is develop them and help them to find whatever their next thing is. I remember J&J at one point, I don't know if you remember this, Lindsay, I think it was J&J, they had an employee referral bonus if you referred someone already at the organization into another place in the organization. I thought that was fantastic, to try to really help to garner that enthusiasm around, internal mobility as well.
I love it. It's a cultural change. I remember
Yeah.
Zappos used to call HR the pipeline, right? So
Yeah.
once you were in the pipeline, wherever you went, but I think it is challenging
Yeah.
to individual managers
Agreed.
as well. So let's stick with your recruiter hat
Sure.
on. It is a great resignation. There are a lot of people quitting. These are outrageous times. It is a cliched question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What's keeping you up at night related to recruiting? There are a million things in the world keeping us up at night, but specifically when you're thinking about recruiting, what's on your mind? And then I'll ask you after that, what's getting you excited? So what concerns you,
Sure.
and then what's getting you excited?
So there's really, I think the two biggest things that are on my mind that are keeping me awake and really, that are keeping me in a job, frankly, is number one, the sheer volume of this movement, and the fact that there are still, I think that there's a general misconception around what this great resignation, like, oh, this is just a blip in time. I strongly disagree. I think that what has happened over the course of the next couple of years, yeah, maybe we're not going to see it as acute as we're seeing it right now, but I think it has given a lot of people, including emerging talent, kind of the wherewithal to take that step back and really think about what they want to do in their careers. And while we're seeing a lot of movement right now, I think that thought process of here's what I want more of that, or I want to think more deliberately about my career choices. I think that's going to be around for a very long time. By the way, that's not a bad thing. But the second thing that keeps me up at night is okay, that means that employers really need to hammer home and double down on those things that are going to make them attractive employers. I think there are still some places in the market that say, well, we're a well-known or established brand. We've never had any trouble, garnering attention from either students or people in the lateral talent market. And those days are just gone. It's almost like the what have you done for me lately? You need to be able to, in a meaningful, authentic way, showcase why you should be on the other end of that great resignation of people coming to your place of business. So I've noticed with EY, the conversation has been, hey, yeah, Dan, we got to hire more people. We're losing, we're seeing some greater turnover just like everyone else. But the conversation is pivoting to what else can we be doing to better retain people? And it's things like we just talked about, Lindsay, certainly about career mobility and experiences and skill building, but it's also things like what's important to people. So your return to work strategy, very, very important. What are your new wellness offerings? Because what you're offering now should look different from what you offered 2-3 years ago, when all we're hearing about, mental health and what's, the taxation of what's happening around the world on employees and beyond. So that re-upping of committing to culture, committing to, kind of the employee value proposition has to be authentic, but it has to be something that's front and center. The way I've said it is I go into board meetings at EY and say, hey, I can keep hiring. We hired 140,000 people last year. I mean, I had a full head of hair before that. So we can keep doing that, but I don't want to keep filling a leaky bucket. What are we doing to make sure that we're, rehiring, re-recruiting our employees through investments in their experience?
I like that reframing. Yeah, people are leaving, but they're going somewhere. So how do we become a destination where people are, reshuffling to? A lot of comments, and we've got Arushi, a grad student at Babson. Welcome, Arushi. Manny talked about this desire for mobility happens in higher ed as well. I so believe that the biggest obligation we have to the people we lead is to help them go wherever they want to go. And I know that's a sign of a really strong leader. Yeah. Dave weighed in on this as well. Too often an employee gets tagged as a flight risk when they raise their hand about wanting to try something different within an organization, as opposed to a manager helping their employee find the next cool opportunity internally. Allison says, I think once the door is open and attention is drawn to it, then from then on, the option is out there. And Anna also weighing in, it feels like a huge shift in how people feel about what they want, their purpose and meaningful work. And I know EY has really kind of doubled down on the idea of mission and purpose and values. And I want to hear about this because you and I have talked for years about Gen Z and what they're going to want from the workplace. And right. I do think that there is a younger generation. I think the pandemic has, made this even stronger. I want my work to matter. I want to work for an organization whose values align with mine. And it's very hard to put that into practice, right? So you can say, we have values and they're up here on the wall.
Mhm.
How do you actually think about people feeling like their work has meaning and mission and that they're truly aligned to the work of such a huge organization? I really kind of want to get into the weeds on this with you. How do
Sure.
you make values purposeful, and particularly in those early years when a lot of times you're just working on spreadsheets?
Yeah, yeah. So it's a great question, and the answer is you need to be deliberate about it.
Mhm.
Having the building a better working world, having that out there is one thing, but there is a distinct difference, obviously, between organizational purpose and values and individual purpose and values. Now, the whole trick is to see, okay, how can we get those to align on a regular basis? To your point, the day-to-day basis, but it's hard to do that when you're slogging through, a pivot table and an Excel spreadsheet, right? So how you do that is by creating opportunities to remind and reconnect people's individual purposes to the organizational purpose. I'll give you 2 or 3 quick examples of what that looks like. So we actually have right now, we're doing a better working world data challenge, right? So, and I think we have a link to that. And basically what that is, it's tying, it's a challenge open to anybody, including EY employees, that says, okay, how do we bring considerable amount of skills and backgrounds, data skill sets, data analytics, et cetera, together to solve real issues in the world? In this case, this one is about biodiversity. And so a real issue around environmental and sustainability. How do we combine someone's passion and knowledge around, again, maybe it's data, maybe it's finance, maybe it's budgeting, et cetera, to something that's a real world problem that means a lot to a lot of people. You talked about Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z, and they are very interested in this. So giving people the runway to utilize a skill set and combine that with something that they're passionate about, in this case, something around sustainability, that is the perfect way to show, hey, this is how we bring your purpose and our purpose closer together. I think another example is being very deliberate on how we leverage our employees' skill sets in ways that are meaningful to them. So when we have a lot of corporate responsibility opportunities for people, and whether you're interested maybe in equity, or maybe you're interested in mentorship and entrepreneurship, it's finding the skills that you have and bringing that to bear in that area. So I'll give you, in my case, I'm very, very passionate about helping other people and mentoring people. The firm deliberately makes sure that I have opportunities to give back in ways that leverage my skills. So whether that's delivering coursework or presentation, et cetera, to young people, it's not part of my job. But you know what? Now it is part of my life at EY, because that's connecting my purpose to the firm's larger purpose. One last one that I will say, which is also really important, is being deliberate around getting people together, because that's when you really start to see a lot of times culture coming to life and purpose coming to life. And it's hard to do that. We all know we've been sitting, in our home offices behind a screen, two-dimensional for so many years, but creating those moments to be with other people, to share some of those shared values, that culture, that the interaction, and how you go about that. It's not like, oh, thou shalt be in the office XYZ days. It's more like, let's make sure that those meaningful moments are just that. They're live moments, and they're meaningful in that you have the chance to interact, to connect, to meet with people, and again, to be reminded why you chose this place in the first place. I think being that deliberate about it, you have to get into that level of detail.
I so agree. All anyone's talking about is this hybrid model,
Mm.
right? And a lot of it
Mhm.
is come back to the office because we should be in the office. That's not really a good reason. But if you say we want to brainstorm, we want to be innovative, we want to get all of our ideas together, that's a reason that feels
Right.
exciting and interesting and like everybody matters. So I think that sort of explanation of what might seem obvious to some people is
Yeah,
not obvious to a 22-year-old who has only ever worked hybrid.
exactly.
A couple of comments here. I would actually love to get you to weigh in on this on the
Mhm.
opportunity side,
Mhm.
Dan, because you work so much with career services. And as you mentioned, we have a lot of higher ed people watching. Dave Ong, who's the president of NACE, National Association of Colleges and Employers, said, I also agree that we need to keep an eye on attrition out of higher education. I've had several NACE members point out that career services in particular is getting slammed by resignations. We're losing some terrific career center talent who are leaving higher education completely. Can you talk about, from your perspective as a
Yeah.
corporate recruiter, what advice would you give to higher ed or career services people to make that career as attractive as possible, to keep the best people in that business? What are you thinking about the opportunities for career services moving forward?
Yeah, and I've seen that, and I've seen some great people that making moves, and that worries me as well because regardless of all the whether it's automation or other opportunities for employers to be in front of candidates, higher ed and career services professionals in particular continue to be the single best enabler and connector of us to talent. That has not gone away. Maybe what has been called into question by higher ed is with things like budget and and limitations on obviously enrollments are down in lots and lots of places. A lot of those institutions are asking questions about what do we need and what can we spend and what's the investment we need to make. I have offered to certainly all of my friends in higher ed and my contacts in career services, that connection between higher ed and corporates and employers needs to be as strong as ever. And I think sometimes it feels like, and look, I'm on the employer side and I will own this, on behalf of my employer brethren and sister, and it can feel like, well, we can get in touch with students, through another method or through another means. The most meaningful ways that I can get in touch with students and the people that are closest to those students are my connections on university campuses, and leveraging that relationship that we have and the skills that people in higher ed bring to this connection, the recruitment process certainly, but also the better connection to unearthing new talent on campus. That I think just being open to more of that discussion and new ways of making those connections, that's the key, I think, for both employers. But to your question, Lindsay, what we're seeing in higher ed. So how can we partner in different ways, maybe different from the past? Maybe it's not the big career fair because we haven't physically been able to do that. But what are other ways that we can work together to get more meaningful connection with students and typically on a more direct or in a smaller environment where not only does it help us to get in touch with students, but it helps to, again, reinforce and showcase the tremendous value that career services professionals and higher ed professionals bring to this equation, because that has not gone away.
I just feel like over and over the message is, as we get more technological, the winners are going to be the ones who get more personal, right? So I keep kind of hearing that over and over. It's not one or the other, right?
No,
it's both
correct.
of those things together.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of comments here, and then a question for you, Dan. Manny from Harvard. Several of my career services colleagues are lamenting the number of openings on their staffs. Most say they're losing these staff members to corporate talent acquisition roles. I think that higher ed has to be as meaningful on mobility and mission and values and purpose and all the things you're talking about. That absolutely can happen in higher ed. And I want to give a shout out that I am on the NACE committee to reimagine the future of career services. So I think there are a lot of people, and we'd love anyone's input on that. There's a lot of thinking going into really reimagining the career for the future. I have a question for you from Corey Twitty at Netflix. Dan, do you think about retention differently for emerging talent versus your more tenured workforce? What elements of your emerging talent or new grad program are most critical in creating a long-term and successful program for EY?
So Corey, it's a great question. So the answer is yes, we do think about them differently. And in fact, even within that cohort, we think differently. The key to, or the biggest change that I've seen in the last, let's call it the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, even pre-pandemic, is getting much more granular on individual, whether it's retention or the drivers that are important to each individual. Now, that is not easy to do at a large institution. We have 350,000 employees here, but our approach used to be like many corporates. Okay, what are the things that are going to help to drive retention? What are the programmatic things that we can offer? So, employee resource groups and some of the fun stuff that we do outside, or opportunities to volunteer and those kinds of things. It has gotten to a point now where if you're not having an individual conversation with your counselor, with your peer mentor, with people on your engagement about what makes you tick and what you're excited about, you have missed the game. And that is more important for kind of the newer generation or our newer players, our emerging talent, than it is for those, because those that have been around for a long time, in most cases, they've made connections. They know who to go to if they're not feeling like they're getting the experience or exposure that they want. But the people that are newer to us and to the emerging talent, They don't have those connections yet, and particularly in the last couple of years, it's been harder to make them, over a video screen. So we make that a deliberate part of our career discussions, which now happen more on a more frequent basis. Most companies have 1 or 2 times a year. You talk about, here's my performance. It's not just about performance. It's, are you getting the experience that you want? If not, what would you like more of? Right? And those kinds. So getting into that granular level of detail has really made a difference. In fact, our EVP is, the exceptional EY experience. It's yours to build. You need to tell us what it is you want more of. You want to more exposure to, because just saying, hey, we've got all these great programs that people can raise their hand for, that's not enough, and that's certainly not personalized enough, and that's not the expectation of in my experience, millennials or Gen Z. It's they want to have that in-depth discussion around what's important to them. So Corey, yeah, we do think about that differently, and it is much more work to have those one-on-one individual conversations, but the return is much greater to feel like, wow, this huge organization cares about me and my specific needs and aspirations. That's a big deal.
Of course, I want to talk about the generational component to this, and I want to hear additional thoughts from you on Gen Z, who are about like 25 years old and younger is the demographic we're talking about. When I think about Gen Z, this is the generation, I think what makes them the most unique, besides the experience of growing up with COVID now, is that they have never known the world without the internet. We
Right.
called millennials digital natives, but they weren't, because they can remember a time before.
Yeah.
This generation has always had the ability to customize everything,
Correct.
right? To have an iPhone where you pick your own apps. I want you to riff a little bit more on that, because this ability to take a huge, organization with the history of an EY and make it yours, that actually completely aligns with the entire life experience that young people have had today, which is, oh, anything I come into, I can completely customize it to my needs. Do you face pushback from other generations who say, like, nobody did that for me?
Oh, yes.
I think that's kind of the biggest pushback. And then what else do you think this generation is, kind of making you change? Because I just think it's so aligned generationally. So yeah, riff on that.
Yeah. So and Lindsay and I, we've talked about this for years and years and years. I am so bullish on the millennials, on the Zs, and yes, the pushback is real, but it takes someone like me, like a lot of folks in my generation, so the Xers saying, look, just because it's not the same as what you went through doesn't mean it's not as good, or there's not new opportunities. And so pushing through some of that resistance, and the best way to do that, in my opinion, and what I've seen, is let's go out and actually find what they want more of and what they need. And believe it, there's a lot of surprises, we go out and I hear from Gen Zs all the time, like, hey, I want to be successful. I love being loyal to lots and lots of brands, but they're not going to be loyal for the sake of loyalty. They're going to be loyal because you're offering them more of what they want, the variety that they want, the experience that they want. And so hearing from them, so I'll give you a perfect example, going in and saying, well, why do we have to have automation and people that can go in and find their own job? They should just know where they want to go and apply for what they want to go. So we have this thing called Find Your Fit, where we're a huge organization where any student at any time, and candidly, any job seeker can go in and say, here's my background, where might I be a good fit? And even giving that control over to someone who's not even here, and to a young person, in my view, it's the easiest thing to do. And by the way, it's also going to help us to get people into jobs faster. So I try to start with a what's in it for you, for my boomers and the people that are thinking, well, why are we catering to this generation? Because at the end of the day, it gets them enroll faster. It helps them to be better connected to something that they're going to be more interested in, i.e. better work, more production, et cetera, and so forth. But it also it's exactly what they want. And in this talent market, if you're not, focusing on that candidate experience and what they want, you are not going to have a lot of candidates. Full stop. And that is something that most of the senior leaders I talk to, they respond to quite well.
You have a global remit. To me, if you're going to go do business in Hong Kong, you're going to have to adapt some things for the Hong Kong candidate. If you go to France, you're going to have to adapt for France. If you go to Gen Z, you're going to have to adapt some things for Gen Z. So that's kind of how I think about it. Dan, this has gone so fast. I have 900 other questions that I want to ask you. So before I give a little wrap up here, and before Dave Ong posts any more private jokes between us that are making me completely lose my cool while we're talking here, Dave Ong, stop it. Can you give us just some final thoughts from your perspective? What would you leave us with in this utter chaos? What is kind of your North Star? What do you stay focused on as everything is changing?
Yeah. So I think I'm big on silver linings. In my personal life, even during the pandemic, I've gotten to spend more time with my kids. I don't know if they would say that's their silver lining, but it certainly has been mine. I would say be active in doing that same thing in your organization. So whether you're in higher ed or you're an employer, what are those silver linings? I've been able to move some things over the line at pace that have been kind of years and years in the making because of the necessity of the times that we've been living. So focus on those things. I would say number two, stick your nose in other places, right? So I'm the head of talent acquisition, but I'm spending more time talking about enablement and mobility and and learning because these are things that are important to the people that I'm bringing in. And so it's some things that I'm able to get more actively involved in within the organization. And then last but not least, I would say, to the extent that you have spent any time thinking about this, translate, don't miss an opportunity to see what a good organization looks like, whether that's an employer or higher ed, during a time of stress. When an emerging talent, a student, someone that's of a millennial or Gen Z can see that an organization is doing well by its constituents, its employees, et cetera, during a tough time, that really is a good indicator of hey, that's an organization I want to be a part of. They could do this during the tough times. Imagine how it is when when things are going well. So don't miss an opportunity to highlight that if you're doing great things at your organization.
I love that. Thank you, Dan Black of EY, for being our guest on Future Strong, episode 34. Shout out to Nikki Garcia in the sky. We miss you, and we hope that you are safe. I have 3 key takeaways from today's session, and I'm going to give it a theme word, Dan, which I think is proactivity. I think you represent someone who is proactive in your own career of figuring out where you want to go, and also guiding EY and your role at EY to be proactive about so many of the changes happening rather than waiting and seeing what occurs, really kind of grabbing it and saying, this is who we want to be. And this is a real moment to do that. So I think you shared that in 3 ways. Number 1 is this idea of mobility, creating a culture where people can grow and change and evolve, whether that's in higher ed or in a corporate role. Number 2, creating opportunities to tie people's individual mission and purpose to the values of an organization, and making sure to be very deliberate and, again, proactive about that. Don't just hope that people realize that they're tied to the mission. Give them opportunities to do that and express their passions at work. And number 3, we have so much alignment between higher ed and corporations. And as you said, the connection between higher ed and corporates needs to be stronger than ever. We need to keep finding meaningful ways for companies to reach out to career services, to be personal, to not rely on automation, and make sure that those relationships, which are so strong, are really guiding us forward. So thank you, Dan, for all of those great thoughts. Thank you to everyone in the audience for all of your participation and questions and comments. We will see you in 2 weeks. Dan, I'll leave you with the last word.
I just want to say thank you so much for having me, Lindsay. And like I always say, anytime I talk to anyone, if there's anything that any conversation that anyone wants to have going forward, please reach out. I would love to talk more about the future and be optimistic about it with any one of you. So thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, everyone.